Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for coming. I hope you can hear me. Jolly good. My name is Stephen Maddock. I'm Chief Executive of the CBSO, and it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's conductor, John Wilson, for our... Now, obviously, I was hoping you were going to be wearing your stripy jacket, John, as per the conductor on tonight's programme. As always on these occasions, you will get your opportunity to put some questions in a few minutes' time, so you have your warning to get thinking of that. But, John, fabulous programme tonight. Leonard Bernstein, born 100 years ago, and arguably one of the most versatile musicians of the 20th or indeed any other century. I mean, unbelievable talent in every direction, wasn't he?
Yeah. Lots of people claim versatility, but he really was the real McCoy, a giant. And what is particularly gratifying, I think, is that Bernstein's reputation as a composer is in the ascendant. It's all the pieces are being played now, and I mean, with the exception of perhaps a couple of way out bits of the Mass, there's all the music's good.
Yeah.
You know, and you've got this massive legacy as a conductor, recorded legacy, filmed legacy, you know, a conductor of real genius and significance.
Absolutely.
A very good pianist, as what was it Rubinstein said? Can you remember the quote? The best pianist among conductors, the best conductor amongst composers, the greatest.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, he was really at the top of his game in all the spheres that he worked in. And
tonight's programme obviously focuses on a couple of areas of that. In that we're not going to the more serious end of the concert music, but even if we just take the shows, we obviously have a major piece of film music tonight as well. But if we just start with the shows, such a variety there as well. From, you know, effectively, he kind of invented a particular kind of Broadway musical, but you also have the world of operetta, you have the world of sort of almost towards light opera with Candide, and in the incredible variety between those big shows about New York as well.
I mean, Bernstein knew all the operettas and the musicals. He knew all of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas by heart, all of them. And he was, you know, he was very interested in what was happening on Broadway. And I think in about 1956, there's a film, it's a 90-minute television special called The History of American Musical Comedy, written and presented by Bernstein. And he talks about everything from way before Gilbert and Sullivan, right up to the present moment, and talks about Gershwin, and he talks about Victor Herbert, and he talks about operetta. So it's clear that he knew all of those genres and all those works inside out. And he said, you know, just as Mozart took the comic opera form and made a masterpiece out of it with the magic flute, he said somebody will do the same with the musical form. They will take this form with the vernacular and create a masterpiece. And of course, he did it himself next year. Next year with West Side Story.
West Side Story, yeah.
And that was the secret to it, the vernacular.
Yeah, exactly.
He always said that, you know, the great American musical will use the language of the street. It's like Guys and Dolls, like, you know, Wonderful Town, On the Town, West Side Story. He didn't actually class My Fair Lady and The King and I, for instance, as musicals. He said they were light operas.
Light operas, yeah, exactly. Now, he was... remarkably, these careers all kind of went alongside each other at the same time, didn't they? Because, you know, his big break, being asked to conduct the New York Philharmonic, came at around the same time as he'd been working on the Town, which was the sort of love song to New York itself. That show, as with several of his works, went through various different stages, didn't they? Because On the Town began as a ballet.
That's right. He was kind of canny about reusing material, and some of the material from one of the shows ends up in Chichester Psalms. Do you remember?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah.
But you know, The
Well,
truth.
it's the angry bit in the middle of the second of Chichester Arms was originally intended for West Side Story.
Okay.
It's da 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 da
Okay,
da da. That was meant to be
right.
Jets and Sharks. Yeah.
I see, because Stephen knows everything. You know, he does. He
I
really
just
does
that.
know everything. I was going to say.
So it started as Fancy Free, didn't it?
Yeah, and he was writing these musicals primarily to make some money.
Yeah.
You know, because he had a wife and she wanted to live in a certain amount of style, and he wanted some kind of security. And between 1943 with Oklahoma and 1965, 68, you had a 15-year period when there was great money to be made.
Yeah.
On the Broadway stage, and he made no secret about it. You know, he wrote Wonderful Town in like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to cash in.
And the collaborators were absolutely key, weren't they? Because
Well, particularly for On the Town.
Yeah.
Because it was literally like a Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, let's do the show right here, right now, and they were young, they were full of energy, they were very much people of their own time, you know. They were in New York and wanted to kind of catch the moment, which they did brilliantly.
But also tremendously kind of with that streetwise, both in the libretto and in the music, was this incredibly sort of learned and, as you say, sort of intellectual ease as well that he and Adolph Green, Betty Comden have.
Yeah.
The cleverness in the writing.
And
this was Harvard clever.
Really clever. And actually, which is why when MGM adapted On the Town for the movies, they stripped all the cleverness out of it.
It only keeps 3 songs
it
or
was
something.
Too clever for the average sort of moviegoer of the time.
Yeah.
Yet it had been such a hit on Broadway, they had to have the property because they knew they could make a hit movie out of it with just the title.
But they put in Frank Sinatra and
of course, and they made it into this sort of, they completely demolished it.
Yeah.
But on the, that's why the pieces have really stood the test of time, though.
Yeah.
And you see in On the Town and Wonderful Town, you see the seeds sown of this complete kind of music drama that Bernstein was eventually going to get in West Side Story, which is where the music is of such importance that it actually unlocks some of the questions as to what people are meant to be doing and thinking on stage. And I always, I've done West Side Story a lot. I've done a few complete productions of it. And whenever you are unsure of how to turn something dramatically, you look on the score, and the subito piano marking or an accent or a hairpin will actually give you the direction of what's happening on the stage in every bar. Now, in those other 2 pieces, On the Town, Wonderful Town, which are slightly more diffuse, usually from the point of view of the libretto, you can see Bernstein wanting to implement that, not always completely, but it achieves its complete sort of everything works together in West Side Story, which is what makes West Side Story, it singles it out from every other stage piece.
That's right, and of course it was I mean, he wouldn't have called it a Gesamtkunstwerk, but I mean, it's Wagner's idea of the dance.
I think he did.
Maybe he did actually.
I think he did.
But the dance, the libretto, the book, the music, the lyrics, the basis of every Broadway show, plus the orchestration, which was very specific. Even though obviously there are now different versions of West Side Story, but the original orchestration is incredibly specific.
It was it was kind of unplayable when it was written in 1956. Is it 56 or 57?
56, I think. Yeah.
It was. The orchestras found it really, the original pit orchestra, they found it really hard going. There was only one, when it moved to London, it was, and you got to remember West Side Story was not a hit on Broadway, it was moderately successful. Yeah. Didn't make its money back. It was a massive hit when it came to London. There was only one drummer in the whole of London who could play it.
Really?
Yeah, Phil Seaman. He was the only drummer in the country who could manage it. Yeah. And it was the run in London that made West Side Story. London was ready for it in a way that New York wasn't, which I never understand.
And uniquely of the shows that we're hearing from tonight, West Side Story does have a really great movie based on it.
So they tell me, but
Come. The most Oscars of any film before Titanic.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the stage show holds up and is fresh in a way that the movie somehow isn't. Because do you know what they did? What the great thing about West Side Story is, it's raw and it's written for kids off the street. And when they made the movie, they got movie stars and they got, whoever it was, Irene, I don't know, to design the costumes, and they applied all of those lush 50s MGM production values to something which didn't need it. So I think it looks too glossy.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I mean, the fact that it was filmed on location in 57th Street, wherever.
Yeah.
Where is it? It's up near where Lincoln Center.
Exactly. Yeah.
So to me.
It's on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, I was reading Helene Hanf's book about New York the other day and how the West Side and the East Side have characters which have now been completely swapped.
They're swapped over.
East to the West.
And of course the show was originally going to be called East Side Story.
Was it?
Yeah, because I think it was Catholics and Jews.
Right.
I think it was a different sort of ethnic contrast within New York. Right. I can't remember for sure. Someone here will know, I'm sure. But yeah, it was originally East Side Story, but then it flipped over to the other side.
It wasn't an easy collaboration, West Side Story. There was all sorts of standoffs between Arthur Lawrence. I won't use the language they use because it's too colourful. But I'm not writing a book for a Leonard Bernstein ballet. He had to fight for those dance sequences.
Yeah. And Jerome Robbins, I know you have some experiences because you've actually done the piece, but certainly for many, many years, you weren't allowed to do the piece in concert because, certainly during Jerome Robbins' lifetime, because he and his lawyers contended that this was fundamentally, the dance was such an integral part of the piece that you couldn't take it out.
You couldn't do it. It's only actually this year with the Centenary that they're relaxing the rules so everybody can do it. So there are plans.
There used to be very very technical discussion you always used to have when putting this sort of program together around, because the music publishers would send you a list of the things that you could do from West Side Story, which basically said you could do the symphonic dances and one of the songs, or you could do 3 of the songs, but it had to be this sweet, or you could do one of the other songs, and it was basically like you discovered the rules of Mornington Crescent. It was incredibly fussy, and probably to a degree, look, everyone knows the piece and we all play the symphonic dances all the time, but to an extent there was sort of overprotectiveness about some of his output that has probably hindered it becoming even more played.
There's always complications with theatre pieces. It's the same with any of these great things. The publishers keep very close tabs on them, especially the collaborative ones where there are lots of estates involved and things like that. But I was reading in the programme, I was amazed to see that this orchestra didn't play any Bernstein until 1973.
When it played the Mass.
Yeah.
So I think it gave the English premiere of the Mass, I think. And I think that was the first note it had played,
But would that have been common across most UK orchestras?
Yeah, I think
he wasn't really a composer.
He just wasn't. He was a little looked down upon, and he was a Broadway composer. He was a musicals composer, not really for the concert hall.
And I remember when I first did West Side Story, I was 18 when I first did it. It was 1919. People were. Then it was just considered a kind of just a sort of show, piece of pop music, a kind of show that there was none of this this is a serious piece of music.
Now the other piece that falls into the category of I think, probably the second greatest masterpiece for the theatre after West Side Story, which we hear tonight, is several numbers from, is Candide. And that also had a very complicated genesis, didn't it? Because it was quite political.
Yeah, and there are 2 completely different versions of the piece with different lyricists, different books, and I actually wanted to do some of the numbers when I put this program together for the proms in 2015, which was for the 25th anniversary of Bernstein's death, and we're doing it all over the world, but this is the only orchestra I wanted to do it with in this country for a number of reasons. One of them being that I know they can cope with all the different styles, and they have a brilliant chorus with the university, so it made sense to do it here. But when I was putting the program together, I wanted to do the original version of Candide, and I was told under no circumstances at all would that ever be permissible.
And that's with where lots of the text is by Lillian Hellman, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. And
who fell foul of McCarthyism. I mean, it's tied up with that whole era of American history.
So that was withdrawn. And I mean, what I think about Candide is it's the greatest musical ever written for a CD, in that it's a triumphantly marvelous score, but you can literally take the scenes and put them in any order you like, and the piece will not suffer. Yeah. There is absolutely no logic to the book. Well, in terms of continuity, you can watch them and have a very good time, and you can watch the second act before the first act almost. It's extraordinary. And
it's proved a remarkably, I guess, like West Side Story, it's proved an incredibly resilient show. I mean, I've seen West Side Story done in a prison with a cast of singers plus prisoners. That energy, absolutely amazing. I've seen Candide done, by the in opera houses. There was a famous Scottish opera production 25 years ago.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. But also, I've seen the National Theatre production where the National Theatre did it with a tiny pit orchestra, basically, and singing actors rather than opera singers.
I think
recorded it with opera singers.
I think the best way to do Candide is with singing actors, and that's why we have cast tonight. Absolutely, emphatically cast singing actors.
Yeah.
And you will. I hope you will see why, that choice has been made. Something like Glitter and Be Gay. I've seen that, done by legitimate opera singers, and I've seen Scarlett Strallen doing, and I think it's absolutely an actor's piece.
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think there's something. I'm sure some of you will have seen the televised concert performances that the London Symphony Orchestra did with Bernstein conducting just before he died. I think it was autumn of '89.
Yeah.
And that was with opera singers. They recorded it for Deutsche Grammophon, Jerry Hadley, June
and some of it
Anderson.
is beautifully, Jerry Hadley's a beautiful singing, but it's a kind of sort of staid affair.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think as with the famous West Side Story that he also conducted with Carreras and Kiri Takanawa, it's a different kind of piece, really, but it's not the only way. It's not the way I think most of us would generally like to hear that music.
But also the casting was topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
For that.
The Spanish speaker playing the English speaker, and the English speaker playing the Spanish speaker.
And anyway.
So we've got a couple of other shows tonight that are with single numbers that are much less well known. Peter Pan was quite early, I think, wasn't
Incidental music, I think, to a straight play.
Yeah.
But that's a gem of a song, orchestrated by, especially for concert performance by Sid. Is it Raymond?
Sid Raymond, who was his orchestrator.
Who was still alive, who was born the same year as Bernstein. They were school friends.
That's right.
And Sid Raymond and Owen Costar were the orchestrators of West Side Story, and they worked really closely with Bernstein. It's not that Bernstein couldn't have orchestrated it himself, of course, but he was too busy in rehearsals.
It was the speed, wasn't it?
West Side Story was orchestrated in 3.5 weeks, whilst it was in rehearsal, because you can't set the routines until they've been rehearsed. So that's why you have to have orchestrators.
Collaborators.
And then there's
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which was one of his rare, I think that was basically a flop, wasn't it?
Huge flop. Yeah. Written for Patricia Routledge, and that's why there's that gorgeous contralto number, Take Care of This House. People forget that Hyacinth Bouquet, as she's known, was actually a very famous legitimate mezzo-soprano who had a career as a singer. And I love that piece. It was reborn as the White House cantata.
That's right, yeah.
So we hear the President Jefferson Sunday Luncheon March, which I'm told stopped the show I mean, how many performances did it have? It had
not,
like 8 or something like that.
Yeah, it was a big flop.
It was a big flop, but that number was still strong enough to stop the show. But again, we keep coming back to the same things. Even if the book saw catastrophes, the music these shows have survived because of the music, because it's so strong.
Yeah, Peter Pan has another very beautiful song as well about this house or my house. It's another.
Okay.
It's another similar theme. And then by way of further contrast in this program, we have, I think, what was his only original film score, is that right, on the Waterfront?
Not only his only original film score, but one of those rare things is I can only think of one or two other examples, like Close Encounters, where the music was conceived symphonically and large portions of the film were shot around the music.
That's right, yeah.
You know, so it's a proper piece. He conceived it as a 20-minute piece. It's actually the longest single uninterrupted symphonic span he ever wrote.
That's right.
It's his longest single movement.
I
don't know how long it runs for. It's about
19, 20 minutes.
20 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
And I've conducted on the Waterfront 9 or dozen times, and it's really interesting music. There are so many things to find every time you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
there's no fat on it. Every note matters.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think he had written the first symphony by this point, but not, I think, the others. So which is also I mean, that's probably the closest thing in terms of something of a big span.
I wonder what was the genesis of that piece. I mean, somebody would know, but it seems to me he got the script of the film, and then had the overall view of the film in his mind, had a vision for what the music would be, and just wrote that piece, and then of course it was cut to. You know, my favourite story about that, it's the most famous example of that whole thing is when Eric Coates wrote the Dam Busters March, and he got the call saying, would he do it? And he said, I think I finished it yesterday. He wrote it 2 weeks before he got the call, and everybody thinks it's the perfect match to the film.
Yeah, and it was, and again, I think this story very tied up in the politics of the time. A film all about trade unions and the docks, but a director who fell foul of McCarthyism. So Bernstein was not only a wonderful and talented and incredibly versatile composer, but around in many interesting moments of American history.
Yeah, and a great human being.
Yeah,
and he wrote this film because he had to. He really wanted to. He was not a fan of the Hollywood system.
Correct.
When he had to write,
particularly after what had happened to On the Town.
That sort of poisoned it for him.
Yeah, exactly.
He went to MGM, sat in the canteen, wrote the song, didn't speak to anybody.
Yeah.
And then went back to.
And then went back. Yeah.
That's
right, because they wanted one new song, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's an amazingly varied program. It ends with my absolutely favourite piece of the whole program, which is Make Our Garden Grow, which is...
it's the only thing you can end with, really.
It's just... so I will be in floods of tears at the end of the concert, so please, I get my apologies in early for that. Who would like to put a question to John about tonight's concert? Yes, sir.
I'm really interested with Bernstein, 20th century music, but what's following on from that? Is it Hamilton, or is it actually... Where are we going to with musical theatre?
I'm not an expert on the musical theatre, I can tell you that now, because my enthusiasm stretches from Gilbert and Sullivan to about 1965, because after that, a lot of musicals stopped using orchestras, which is why my knowledge fizzles out.
Yeah.
Because I'm not involved with them. I think you can't underestimate the influence that Bernstein had on Stephen Sondheim, and I think he's definitely the next genius of the musical theatre, and he's writing a new piece at the moment. But I think,
and indeed one of the collaborators on West Side Story.
Yeah, he was the lyricist.
Help with the lyrics.
Yeah. I mean, they're all his lyrics, and pieces like Sweeney Todd. Little Night Music, is a marvelous piece, and I think Assassins is a fantastic piece. Hamilton, I don't know, but I've seen the trailer, and I'm going to go and see it. So if you ask me in a couple of weeks, I'll tell you what.
Oh, well, you've done better than I have, because I'm not going till July. But I've listened to the soundtrack incessantly, and I think certainly, whilst I don't think there's a direct musical connection, but I think what Bernstein would have recognised in Hamilton is this bringing together of the vernacular, the really, really clever, and the beautifully composed as well. So I think there is a connection there. But I agree with John. Absolutely, Sondheim is the closest connection through that,
and I think
in a way that Lloyd Webber and other things are not really.
But I think Sondheim's taken things. He took things to the next level, didn't he?
Yeah.
In terms of musical, he's got his own musical language.
Yeah.
You can hear 2 or 3 bars of a Little Night Music. It could only be by Stephen Sondheim. And the great thing, I think the single greatest thing about Sondheim is he's a dramatist.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Those shows are riveting to watch, even if.
And the lyrics are, to be honest, as with Cole Porter, is that a fair comparison? Sometimes the lyrics even outshine the music.
I think there's a bewilderingly sophisticated.
Yeah.
But you've always had people who did that. Noel Coward did it brilliantly.
Yes. Again, Noel Coward, probably the lyrics are more, in the end, more memorable and accomplished than the music,
Yeah.
Another question. Yes, madam.
Well,
did you hear that at the back?
I'll answer I'll try and sort of ask the question and answer it. How do you enlighten audiences about pieces through talking and educating and things like that? I always think the first thing you can do, I know this sounds really sort of self-evident, but is play the piece really well so that it's actually makes an impression. So like you mentioned Oklahoma, which we did at the proms this year, I put so much time and effort into casting that so that we had the best people we could possibly find in the world to do it and to insist on enough rehearsal time. And, I think hats off to the BBC, they still have really good people on the radio to introduce these things, to try and give background information. And if you listen to Radio 3 on the interval, there's always a tedious interview with me, where I'm asked
always,
where I'm asked to explain my thoughts on the piece. But in terms of the genre, just for convenience's sake, to talk about what we're doing tonight as light music or musicals, just to put it somewhere, it's only in the past decade, really, that this music has started to be appreciated on a level which warrants explanation. 10 years ago, you couldn't buy a score of My Fair Lady. There was no full score. Now you can get a full score for nearly everything. And I suppose, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I think doing those things at the proms with my orchestra has definitely changed people's appreciation. Would you say?
Certainly, and the idea that this is music that can be taken sort of properly seriously. So your insistence on doing things in the original versions and correct orchestrations and things like that, which was not a tradition in musical
theatre. Well, they didn't exist. I mean, first of all, exactly. John McGlynn was the spearheaded all of that in the theatre. But you know, these restorations of film musicals that I've done, I did those out of necessity. So I do feel as if I've been right in the coalface of it.
Yeah.
Sort of, and so hopefully, to answer your question, that will lead. And I think there has already been some sort of like the BBC 4 documentaries about musical theatre and things like that. It will lead to more appreciation, scholarly appreciation.
I think that's right, and I think to a degree the same journey has happened over the last decade or two with film music. And we do in our Friday night series here this Friday, we're doing a program of a lot of very famous film scores, but that we take as much care now over getting the right versions. All the John Williams things are published in a kind of urtext edition. You take as much care over getting exactly the right version as you do when you perform Bach or Mozart. This has all changed so much.
I read somewhere the other day that the next biggest area of music scholarship is going to be theatre music.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
And film music.
I'm sure that's right. And you'll hear that tonight. I mean, these are all in, I guess, are they all the original theatre orchestrations
Everything,
tonight?
this programme took me weeks to get to the guy. There's 40-something running orders till I eventually settled on what we've got to do. And then, with the help of Boozy and Hawkes, there are several, half the programme got newly engraved materials for the orchestra. Everything to the last quaver is something Bernstein would have approved of.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's all,
and that, as I say, that is like when the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment play Bach or Rameau or something. It's the same process, really, to get back absolutely to what the composer intended. We had another question here. Okay.
Well, it's a question you can answer on a couple of levels. I mean, the first thing is the program, the actual running order. I really do slave on these and slave away at these till I think I get them right. And it's like a three-dimensional game of chess. You want to put together a program that works from beginning to end, that has the right sequence of moods, but which also showcases all of the pieces that you want to look at, and then also is balanced in terms of the number of people singing what, and the voices. Have you got enough duets? Is there a trio? Do you need a solo there? So I actually do it on little cards. I write, and I've got all the cards, and I shuffle them around, and I sort of set them up until I get them right. Once the program is right, then I assemble the materials, which takes a long time. Writing music down and setting it into print. Again, a lot of this was done, but I still had to get Boozy and Hawkes to go through archives to find stuff that they hadn't found for years, and then you have to cast it. And I'm lucky in that I've got what I use the word stable. It makes them sound like horses, but like a stable of singers that I've worked with over the years who really are empathetic to this material. A lot of them are theatre people, actors.
Absolutely.
And then, luckily, if I've then done a programme at the Proms and I want to bring it from London to, say, here in Birmingham, then, of course, Stephen's organisation takes care of everything else. I don't have to do anything other than just rehearse it,
Exactly. Well, and the I mean, we've got a fabulous cast tonight, absolutely wonderful cast. But one of the differences between the classical music world, and particularly opera, and the theatre world, is that opera singers in general are booked up anything up to 5 years ahead. Whereas if you ring a singer's agent and ask about whether their client would be able to do something even in 6 months' time, they usually just laugh at you and say, well, we've no idea. Actor's agent. They say, well, I've no idea. You have to ring back 3 weeks before the event.
To do anything, because he's always on the tellies. He was just in The Crown playing Bobby Kennedy.
That's right. So they're two completely different cultures. Basically, for opera singers, you need to put them as early as possible. And for actors and singing actors like we have tonight, you kind of need to put them as late as possible. Yeah. It's very strange. I think they always think Mr. Spielberg's going to ring just at at the last moment. So that's the thing that makes us most nervous. You'll have noticed that I think Kim had committed, but was probably the only name that was in our original brochure, and that's simply that fact that people, Julian was always very keen to do it, but he simply didn't know until
but he's also,
a couple of months ago that he would be free.
They're under contract by the television companies who say you cannot take anything for the next 3 months, and they get paid for sitting at home for 3 months. So there's a question somewhere.
Sorry, one more question. Probably about 18 months ago, this one?
I think so, yeah.
After you'd done it at the proms.
I did it at the proms 2.5 years ago, and then I rang you up and said, do you want to do it? And you said yes, and then you start getting all the things in place that you can get into place.
Exactly. So, it was our first piece of the jigsaw for the Bernstein Centenary. We do the serenade for violin and orchestra later in the season in May, and there'll be one or two more things in the autumn as well. So, but this was a really big plank for us, a way of getting some of our absolutely favourite songs in a kind of organised and meaningful way.
I had a lunch with Bernstein's eldest daughter, Jamie Bernstein, about 3 weeks ago, and she was telling me that there are 3,400 separate events this year, concerts, and the three kids, Bernstein's three kids, are all going to something pretty much every day. They've drawn it up like a kind of
a military campaign.
A military campaign, and
fantastic.
And I have to say, my diary this year, my agent ran me, she's doing a lot of Bernstein this year. I mean, I'm doing nearly everything he wrote this year.
Yeah.
I'm doing symphonies and the violin serenade, and I can't say too much, but I'm doing lots of the theatre pieces in their entirety, and so I think it's great that his reputation as a composer is flourishing. And I think there was a guy called, is it Craig Urquhart? You know him at the Boozy and Hawks? He worked really hard after Bernstein died. He was Bernstein's assistant when he was alive. He worked really hard with Boozy and Hawks to make sure that Bernstein's legacy flourished.
Yeah.
And these things don't just happen on their own.
No,
Bernstein has a marvelous publisher in Boozy and Hawks.
Yeah.
They've really done a marvelous job to sort of make sure that his music is out there and it gets heard.
Absolutely, and that for people like me organising concerts, and for you conducting and putting things together, often that stuff which you perhaps don't see is just really, really important. There are major composers who have almost disappeared from sight, not because the music isn't wonderful, but because they had terrible publishers, or indeed no publisher. It's one of the accidents of musical history, actually. So we're very, very fortunate with Bernstein that this is all available, that it's now in a performable form, and I think we're going to have a wonderful evening tonight. I mean, I think you're all here because you love seeing John conduct this music and hearing these things, but there are pieces tonight that the CBSO has played very often. There are pieces that we've never played before, and to hear it all here in this amazing acoustic with this fabulous cast, I think we're going to have a whale of a time. So John, thank you.
So.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the concert.